First off, thank you all for coming and welcome back. This afternoon's event is called Telling Our Story. My name is Jack Dillon. I'm a sophomore here at Notre Dame, studying history and economics. I will be introducing today's panelists. After the conclusion of our talk today and the presentations of our panelists, we'll have a brief question and answer session. To my left, we have our first panelist, Irina Grosu. Irina Grosu is the director for the Center for Human Dignity at the Family Research Council, where she focuses on sanctity of human life issues, ranging from conception to end-of-life care. Ms. Grosu has appeared in various media outlets, including USA Today, Bloomberg, National Journal, Congressional Quarterly, Daily Caller, Town Hall, Washington Times, Christian Post, National Catholic Register, BuzzFeed, and American Family News. Ms. Grosu is a graduate of the University of Notre Dame with a BA in philosophy and a minor in art history. She received her MA in theology, magna cum laude, from the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C. She also received her license in Montessori for ages 0 through 3 from the Association Montessori Internationale. Ms. Grosu worked at CRC Public Relations in Alexandria, Virginia, coordinating media relations for pro-life public policy groups. She was a production assistant for EWTN's The World Over with Raymond Herrera, a show on the Catholic TV channel. She helped launch and was the executive director of the Word Proclaimed Institute, a Catholic nonprofit that aids clergy to come in closer contact with the Word and be able to proclaim it more effectively. She also helped start a Montessori toddler program at St. Jerome's Academy, a Catholic classical education school of the Archdiocese of Washington. Ms. Grosu transcribed the New York Times bestseller, The Prayers and Personal Devotions of Mother Angelica. Ms. Grosu has been involved in the pro-life movement for 15 years, including being the president of the Notre Dame Right to Life. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Grosu. To Ms. Grosu's left is Michael Bradley. Michael Bradley is a senior studying philosophy and theology at the University of Notre Dame. He currently serves as editor-in-chief of the Irish Rover, Notre Dame's independent Catholic student newspaper, and is managing editor of Ethica Politica, the online journal of the Center for Morality and Public Life. This year, he is an honors fellow with the Intercollegiate Studies Institute and a fellow in Notre Dame's Tocqueville program for inquiry into religion and American public life. A graduate of the Booth Institute's It Takes a Family conference, he has spoken about marriage on several radio programs and on EWTN's Life on the Rock program. And his writings on the subject have been featured in several publications. On March, he coordinated Marriage, the Church, and the Common Good, Philosophical, Pastoral, and Social Reflections, a panel discussion featuring Ryan Anderson, Sharif Jodis, Jennifer Roback-Morse, and Ron Village, as well as the John Paul II Catholic Leadership Sign. He recently co-authored a call to action, a petition directed at administrators of Notre Dame urging them to take up a public defense of marriage. Please join me in welcoming Michael Bradley. Joining our discussion is our final panelist, Katrina Harrington. Katrina Harrington received her BA in economics with a minor in French from the University of Notre Dame in January of 2011. During her time at Notre Dame, she studied abroad in Angers, France, and completed a summer internship in Liège. After a short stint working in human resources at Aon in Chicago, Katrina made the decision to stay at home after she and her husband welcomed their newborn son into the world. Since then, she and her husband have added another son to their family, and they live close to campus. In 2012, she started her blog, Cedars and Tiny Flowers, to chronicle their family life from her pint and rosy point of view as a wife and mother. Please join me in welcoming Katrina Harrington. With that, we'll hear from our first panelist, Irina Grosu.
First of all, I want to thank you for having me. It's an honor to come back here to my alma mater. That's why I'm wearing blue and gold today. I decided this is what I was going to wear just to honor being here. Also, in the back, after this session, there's a number of different brochures that I certainly don't want to carry back to DC with me. So please grab them. They're written by our senior fellows at Family Research Council where I work. And so one's on debating homosexuality, the top 10 harms of same-sex marriage, the top 10 myths about homosexuality, the Bible's teaching on marriage and family. And this one, Mary, is an institute at the Family Research Council that deals with the effect of divorce and other issues on children and on the family unit. And they have a number of different reports and studies. And then we also have Marriage on Trial, which is more of a constitutional aspect of the issue. So I just wanted to give all of you that information to have. So my talk is called Marriage, Framing the Debate. You are here today because you care about marriage and the future of the family unit. We are living at a time of an enormous battle to protect the integrity of marriage as the union between one man and one woman. The assault to dismantle marriage has at root the desire to make socially acceptable that which is fundamentally disordered and that goes against human nature. Proponents want it stamped with a seal of approval from the general population. The purpose of marriage is not to confer dignity. We all have dignity, no matter what attractions we have. We all have dignity. So marriage is not going to step in and confer dignity on that relationship. Those who struggle with same-sex attraction already have dignity. The deconstruction of natural marriage will lead to the deconstruction of society. Society hinges on the institution of marriage for its very survival, since the natural family is the basic unit, cell of society. It is often said that the one who frames the issue wins the debate, and it's the winner who writes the history books. We must win the battle or lose society, and right now, the other side is winning. So let's look at what we're doing wrong and what we're doing right, and why this is happening. The words we choose are important. Language has meaning and implications. We are losing because we are accepting the terms. In the movement to protect the unborn, the language of pro-choice and right to privacy won for a long time over pro-life and the right to life. They are called abortion facilities, not clinics, since nothing medically clinical is going on there for the benefit of the mother and the child. He is an abortionist, not a doctor, assuming that a doctor's role is to save lives. The words we use define how we talk about the issue of abortion and pointing to the truth. We must do the same with our language surrounding marriage. When it comes to same-sex relationships, we should not call them marriage, first of all, because they can never be a true natural marriage. We cannot even call them unions, because any disorder creates a disunion at the core. What does every human being desire? It's unity, but it's looking for unity in all the wrong places. We should not even make the dichotomy between homosexual and heterosexual persons. We are persons, first and foremost. Most persons have natural opposite sex attraction. There are those who struggle with same-sex attraction. If we make that dichotomy, we lose something in the process. We're creating a second version of a person. We are persons first. We should not call it traditional marriage. We are not fighting for the one-man, one-woman marriage because it is traditional. Not all traditions are good or logical. We are fighting for it because it's true to our nature. Furthermore, same-sex relationships are not progressive as opposed to traditional. Same-sex relationships existed in Greek and Roman times in the time of the Old Testament. So let's gut out the usage of the word traditional once and for all. Most people have a knee-jerk reaction to traditions, as good as they may be, but not even tradition is an adequate assessment of why we support natural marriage. Words that are more fitting than talking about marriage is to refer to it as the natural marriage, or matrimony, which preserves the etymology of mother, mater, tying marriage to parenthood. Let's bring it back to what it's about. So going into that, sexual difference matters. The difference is the difference. There is a positivity in the difference that cannot be underplayed. Males and females are equal in dignity, but different in expression, and there's beauty in that. Each of the two sexes is an image of the power and tenderness of God, with equal dignity, though in a different way. The union of man and woman in marriage is a way of imitating the flesh, the Creator's generosity and fruitfulness. Therefore, a man leaves his father and his mother. Already it's assumed he's leaving his mother and father and cleaves to his wife, and they become one flesh. All human generations proceed from this union of man and woman. Physical, moral, and spiritual difference and complementarity are oriented toward the goods of marriage and the flourishing of family life. The fruitfulness between a man and a woman is ordained and created by nature, not by governments or public opinion. Our very biology and natural makeup dictates that fruitfulness that comes from the sexual difference. Two persons with the same sex attraction can copulate till the cows come home, and they will never ever be able to produce a child. If a person with same-sex attraction were to come together with a person of the opposite sex, even once, the possibility of conception is there at the very first act. Third, we must keep the ends and goods of marriage at the forefront in the unitive and the procreative aspect. The spouses' union achieves the twofold end of marriage, the good of the spouses themselves and the transmission of life. These two meanings or values of marriage cannot be separated without altering the couple's spiritual life and compromising the goods of marriage and the future of the family. There is an absolute, immutable truth about fertility. The union of a male and a female is fruitful. Fruitfulness is a gift, an end of marriage. Conjugal love naturally tends to be fruitful. A child does not come from outside as something added onto the mutual love of the spouses, but brings from the very heart of that mutual giving, at its fruit and fulfillment. So the Church, which is on the side of life, teaches that it is necessary that each and every marriage act remain ordered per se to the procreation of human life. And this is why homosexual relationships are disordered. Fertility is built into the natural marriage, and we are surprised when a man and a woman can't conceive. Have you wondered, why are we surprised? It's because fertility between a man and a woman coming together is assumed as part of our nature. Infertility in a man or a woman is a disease or impediment that veers from the norm. It is the exception, not the rule. Even if infertility can't lead to the natural fruit, it is still tending to it, and often defies explanation in the face of a surprise pregnancy. But between persons with same-sex attraction, infertility is built in, and no one is surprised by this, with good reason. It's not biologically possible. The twofold ends of marriage cannot be fulfilled between persons with same-sex attraction, but always leaves the act in perpetual frustration, with the impossibility of transmitting life through the sexual act. The Church says, basing itself on sacred scripture, which presents homosexual acts as acts of grave depravity, tradition has always declared that homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. They are contrary to natural law. They close the sexual act from the gift of life. They do not proceed from a genuine, effective, and sexual complementarity. Under no circumstances can they be approved. End of quote. There has been a dissociation of the sexual act from the procreative act. Sex becomes something completely separate from fruitfulness. But we began this process with the introduction of contraceptives, and the further separation of sex from fruitfulness has led to replacing the conjugal act in the creation of children by means of reproductive technologies. A child is not something owed to one, but is a gift. The supreme gift of marriage is the human person. A child may not be considered a piece of property, an idea to which an alleged right to a child would be. Contraceptive sex is very similar to sex between two persons of the same sex. The body speaks a language. Every part of our body has an aim, a purpose, and an end for which it tends. We call this the telos. The purpose of the digestive system is to process food. What if a group of people wanted to normalize the use of the digestive system for an alternate purpose? The reproductive system has its own natural laws, which, with the mystery of how the male and the female reproductive systems function by themselves and also together. Conjugal love between one man and one woman is exclusive by its very expression. Its exclusivity is written in the design of our bodies. We are built for monogamy. Unlike other animals, humans are unique in that it takes 18 years to raise and form a human being from infancy into adulthood, and the presence of both parents yield the best, most stable adults. 4. The child has a right to be raised in an intact, natural family by her biological parents. We must keep children's best interests in the forefront. The child possesses genuine rights. the right to be the fruit of the specific act of the conjugal love of his parents. The child needs love and care, but most importantly, he needs to see the love and unity between the mother and the father. The relationship between the mother and the father is the fault line. The more unity there is, the more the child thrives. Anything less is an injustice to the child. Of course, this does not always happen in our society due to single parenting, adoption, separation, divorce, and death. But it nevertheless is the most beneficial setup for the child. We need to also address the scourge of divorce, which has weakened natural marriage. The societal average norm is that a child will be raised by her biological parents. The exceptions don't nullify the norm. We also need to keep in mind that the child has a right to learn what it means to be masculine and feminine from having an example of a mother and a father in her life. Number 5 to keep in mind when we're out there in social media and all other media is the person struggling with same-sex attraction has dignity and must be treated with the utmost respect. And this has to come across in every interaction that we have with media, because we're always pointed at as the homophobes. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. The church says they must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. These persons are called to fulfill God's will in their lives. If they are Christians, to unite their sacrifice to the sacrifice of the Lord. We must separate persons from attractions. Let's stop calling people homosexuals. They are persons with same-sex attraction. Defining people or allowing people to define themselves by their sexuality is not dignifying. It objectifies and degrades the person to just one aspect of their humanity, while glorifying that aspect. For example, if you were to talk about someone's identity just by his intelligence or looks, that would objectify that person. Our personhood must not be reduced to one characteristic of our humanity. We are an integrated whole. The gay movement has taken advantage of this by claiming that anyone who is a supporter of natural marriage is automatically a homophobe. This is just inflammatory, finger-pointing, and a personal attack. It's an emotional attack, and we've fallen for it. So what are the effects of the same-sex relationships on society? The first and foremost is the destruction of natural marriage. Also, the value and the meaning of sexuality and reproduction have been diminished and have been taken apart. So, what's it to stop the definition of marriage if people can be anything they want to be, if love is defined whatever they want it to be defined as? If marriage is not about the unique and exclusive union between one man and one woman, then we open the door to marriage being further defined as the union between any number of consenting adults. So why not polygamy? Why not unions between adults and children? Between family members? Between people and animals? Where does it end? It also leads to the furtherance of reproductive technologies that are not at the service of human dignity. It will create the definitive rupture between sexuality and procreation. IVF, cloning, 3-parent embryos, processes that have already begun, which will allow people with same-sex attraction to biologically create a link to offspring on demand as a product of their choice. Consider this, I don't know how much time I have left, but there's a beautiful quote from this excerpt from Embryo's Eloquent Form. And it shows the violence of even all of these different reproductive technologies that are not aimed at the dignity of the human person. And it talks about the moment of fertilization and the beauty of that combination. Throughout this time, there are intimate chemical exchanges and signalings going on between the sperm and the sperm cells and the egg. The egg cell's membrane never gets broken. There is something rather more like a mutually agreed fusion of membranes between egg and sperm, a reconstruction through which the sperm eventually ends up inside the egg. And it is now thought that this process is aided by all the other sperm cells attaching to the egg. In the preconception attraction complex, there is no question of an active partner versus a passive partner, nor of a penetrating versus penetrated partner, nor fertilizing versus fertilized one. Rather, a subtle equilibrium of exchange and interaction is maintained. The morphodynamic process of fertilization is like the gesture one may observe very often in the animal realm when mating behavior and mating rituals are taking place. In the nearly never-ending process of exchanging signals or of attraction and repulsion, a male and female animal can circumambulate each other before copulation happens. You could hardly imagine a greater contrast than that one between this meeting and the technique of artificial fertilization such as intracellular sperm injection, where a needle forcibly deforms and then punctures the wall of the ovum in order to inject sperm cells. The needle's action does indeed begin to look like a kind of rape at the cellular level. A process far removed from the subtle, are we going to do this or are we not going to do this? The latter looks more like a marriage made in heaven, a metaphor that may resonate more strongly as we follow the developing embryo after fertilization. So, I will talk after with anyone who would be interested in discussing the risks of same-sex relationships and also the benefits of marriage, as I'm running long.
So, I'd like to begin by thanking Jack for introducing us here today, to thank all of you for coming. It's especially good in my mind to see friends and folks here in the audience whom I know have different opinions than I do on this topic. And so I'm particularly grateful to those of you who have come here to engage in a discussion rather than avoid the opportunity. So thank you for being here. My presentation today is titled Promoting Marriage Through Campus Activism. And I suppose in some ways I'm a fitting candidate to speak on this topic, given some of the things I've tried to do here at Notre Dame during the course of my 4 years. So I'd like to begin firstly by laying out a few things that students can do. I think many of us here are college students. I know that we have some high school students here, which is wonderful to see from the South Bend community. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I guess you could say, strategies that students who are interested in promoting the traditional or conjugal view of marriage can embrace in their efforts to talk about a difficult topic in what are sometimes less than friendly or even hostile environments. More importantly, after I talk about those specific things, I'd like to go a little bit more broadly into the sort of approach one has to take to discussing the marriage, the set of questions that comprise what we call the marriage debate, if one wants to make any headway and retain any friends. So I'm going to be using Notre Dame and my experience at Notre Dame, I suppose, as a case study, drawn from my own examples and speaking about the situations here in this regard. But I hope that this can serve as sort of a case study for any of you future college students, present college students from other universities, and other Notre Dame students. Sort of keep these things in mind. So with that, the first thing one has to do is sort of assess the situation of what we call the marriage debate. I know that today the National Catholic Register actually just published an article by a Notre Dame alumnus named Jonathan Liedl. I've got the article here. It's called The Real Divergence, Young Adults Lead the Defense of Traditional Marriage. And in this article, Sharif Girgis, who was quoted earlier, I believe, by Danielle Mark and perhaps by some others, who was here just about 2 weeks ago to speak on a panel as well, Sharif is quoted as saying this: "In our present context, it looks like choice or consent is the only principle of marriage." And he's referring to the fact that millennials, that is, Americans who are between ages 18 and 29, 3/4 of all Americans in that demographic indicate support for same-sex marriage, and Sharif is sort of addressing the situation at this point. As a result, Sharif says, it's not that young people know the argument for conjugal marriage and have rejected it. They've just never heard it. I think that's something important to keep in mind. In the book, What is Marriage, which I highly recommend, I know someone else recommended this, but we've got, I believe, copies outside still on the table, at one of the tables out there. It's a fantastic book, and co-written by Sharif and Ryan Anderson, who was also here a few weeks ago, and Professor Robert George at Princeton. I really recommend everyone here picking up a copy if they haven't yet. So he talks more about that dynamic at length in the book. But this is the reality that one faces on a college campus. It's not so much that folks have heard the arguments for traditional marriage and conjugal marriage laid out responsibly. It's that they really haven't actually encountered responsible argumentation. And in a special way, they most likely haven't encountered, especially at a Catholic school like Notre Dame, an argument in defense of traditional or conjugal marriage that is not rooted in appeal to revelation or in theological argumentation, or an argument that in any way implicates the teachings of the Catholic Church or of Christian orthodoxy. And one of the beauties of the book, What is Marriage, is that the authors at the very get-go say, we're going to lay out a case for what they call conjugal marriage, what most of us here would call traditional marriage. And in doing so, we're not going to talk about whatsoever the morality of heterosexual or homosexual sexual actions. That has nothing to do with the argument we're about to make. We're not going to talk about whether inclinations or patterns of attraction are ordered or disordered or anything of that nature. And they don't. And yet they lay out what is, in my mind, by far the most persuasive, convincing and compelling defense of conjugal marriage. So the first thing for students, especially here at Notre Dame, to keep in mind, for future college students, is that despite the fact that we're attending a university, many of us here attend Christian or Catholic universities, colleges in the area, despite that fact, you're going to have to find a way to present marriage in an attractive, appealing way to your peers without appealing to revelation, without appealing to church teaching, for the simple reason that most of your peers aren't going to buy that. Now, that doesn't mean anything about the validity of those arguments or the truth of those propositions involved therein, but it's just simply a fact that we have to find much more convincing ways of framing our argumentation if we want to talk to our peers responsibly. The situation here at Notre Dame reflects that reality very obviously, and I'm going to spend my last few minutes, I think, trying to address some recent developments we've had here at Notre Dame concerning, I suppose you could say, the dialectic between the two sides here regarding marriage. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Secondarily, given that statistic which I've just referenced, that 3/4 of folks my age oppose an understanding of marriage that is traditional or conjugal, it would behoove students to find professors, preferably tenured professors, who have job security, with whom you can talk about these things, and from whom you can glean wisdom, and who can possibly assist you in hosting conferences of this nature. Professor Munoz is here in the audience somewhere, I think. If not, he was outside. Yeah, he's outside. But here at Notre Dame, in my experience, whether it's working with Professor John Cavadini, about whom many of you have heard, he's a brilliant theologian, or Professor Munoz in the Tocqueville program, who have been so generous to us, as students, you really have to sort of flock to peers and faculty who support, I guess, and I suppose, whose like-mindedness without allowing you to indulge in echo chamber sort of approach to these issues will give you a space within which you can develop your own thoughts, and I suppose you could say a non-combative environment, which is important for the development of anyone's thoughts. And you really can seek out a lot of guidance from professors. So in a special way to the students who are here at Notre Dame, who are returning next year to school, I really recommend this. Meet with professors, get to know them personally, talk about them. You might be surprised at how many professors feel the way that you do about these issues, and yet, for various professional, perhaps personal reasons, are less than willing to engage publicly about them. So keep that in mind as well. That's something you're going to want to do. Thirdly, folks who defend traditional marriage very much like to say, our appeal is rooted in reason. Our appeal is not masking any sort of anti-homosexual animus, etc. That ought to be the case. That is not always the case. And so, if you want to speak with any degree of credibility, your life, not just what you say or write when you're discussing these topics, but your life has to be a consistent, integrated witness to what you say, and your actions have to bespeak the sort of sexual ethic that you're going to implicate anytime you talk about marriage. And so if a student here at Notre Dame, for example, were to sit down and decide, I'm going to be somebody who stands up for traditional marriage, and yet his or her own life evinces a less than enthusiastic engagement with the same sexual principles that underlie, I suppose you could say, not just sexual morality, because like I said, that's a discussion that one can have separately. It's important not to conflate the two. But to talk about marriage, if you're somebody who's not really observing the good of marriage in your own life through whatever way, which some of our speakers have talked about earlier, you can speak with no credibility, and you don't deserve to be listened to. And so this is very important to keep in mind, and I fear that this has done more damage to the cause of traditional marriage than anything else: a lack of credibility, a lack of actual compassion towards anyone regarding whatever they may be struggling with, personal or intellectual, as they try to grapple with these issues. So that's something that's important too. Thirdly, to be frank, or maybe fourthly, I don't know where I am at this point, one has to be pretty comfortable being the object of grave misunderstanding, serious scorn, and and a total lack of charity. You have to be pretty comfortable being a student in that position. Bishop Jackson spoke very persuasively this morning over here about how his experience as a black pastor in Washington, D.C. to support traditional marriage and to downplay the oft-invoked analogy between the bans on interracial marriage and the current situation surrounding same-sex marriage. He was treated as a pariah, he was treated as a right-wing conspirator, and in some ways it's sort of shocking, although I suppose at this point we shouldn't be shocked with how little civility you will be met if you publicly defend traditional marriage, even with the best of argumentation, and even if your life is wholly credible. Now this shouldn't surprise us, I suppose, in large part, because the marriage debate is comprised, as I said earlier, of questions that implicate serious concerns about human good, about the human goods, about justice, about rights, about equality. These are serious things, and it's an issue worth taking a stand on. It's not an issue that one can't take a stand on, so apathy is the only choice one doesn't have as a young person regarding marriage. But that's something to keep in mind. You have to prepare, basically, to develop a pretty thick skin. I know that I have had to, especially in the past few weeks here at Notre Dame. And that's just part of the reality. It shouldn't be that way, but it is. So it's something to keep in mind. Finally, here at Notre Dame, I suppose anywhere, especially if you're attending the school, the institutional commitments of which I suppose we can say are Catholic or Christian, and therefore ought to lend support to the defense of conjugal marriage. You have to find a way, I don't want to say to be cunning, but one must be savvy in dealing with administrators, peers, not just in the sense that one has to speak very cautiously, and I think it's appropriate to use that phrase, one has to be in light of the sort of hostility with which one's views will be met. One has to be extremely cautious in how one speaks, like I said, how one acts. And in a special way, you have to learn how to deal with administrators whose commitment to the church's teachings, this is certainly true in Notre Dame's case, is tepid at best and perhaps non-existent at worst, which is my own fear concerning marriage and sexuality here, after 4 years of very closely charting the development of things on campus. Keep that in mind. So these are broader things. Speak with your professors, gather together with like-minded peers, educate yourself fully. Like I said, if you haven't read What is Marriage, you very much ought to. No matter what your views are in this debate, that's important. I highly recommend Public Discourse, which is the online journal of the Witherspoon Institute, which I believe may have been mentioned at this point in the day, but perhaps it has not been. These are, please contact me, meet me outside, and I can give you links. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource. Educate yourself. Become fully educated. And don't be afraid. John Paul II's favorite phrase, I think the phrase repeated most often actually, was do not be afraid. And of course, he didn't originate that line. It comes from somebody far more powerful than he is. The point is this: the church and Notre Dame and the world has very much its fair share of Nicodemuses, the figure from the gospel who was a disciple by night for fear of the Jews. We've had enough of that. And in a lot of ways, Pope Francis, one of the chief merits, I think, of his papacy at this point so far, has been the way in which he's basically said to members of the Catholic Church, but also to all people of goodwill worldwide, we've had quite enough of this cowardice, this unwillingness to go out to what he calls the margins, the existential margins of the world, which are much more depressing, he says, than any sort of materialistic depravity, poverty. Francis says that the real poverty is spiritual poverty, intellectual poverty. And for far too long, members of Francis's church have stood behind words that sound very egalitarian, very compassionate, and yet fail to actually engage people who need to be engaged because they need to hear arguments, they need to encounter the gospel. If you can't do that, no one will listen to anything that you say, and your arguments will fall on very rocky soil that will not take root, you will not convert people. I know that I have about 2 minutes left, and so I would very briefly like to comment on the situation here at Notre Dame for those of you who are interested, and to sort of use the situation here at Notre Dame as a case study in how not to approach the discussion about marriage. So some of you may have seen that about 1 month ago now, I co-authored a marriage petition called A Call to Action, addressed to university administrators. In that petition, we cited Beloved Friends and Allies, which is the foundational pastoral document of Notre Dame's Gay Straight Alliance. It's authors of the document that Notre Dame issued in response to an increasing student desire for a more robust explanation of the Church's sexual ethic and its pastoral duties to students here of every sort. We cite the Catechism of the Catholic Church. We cite Pope Francis, who is probably the most credible message of the gospel alive today in the church. And we cite Notre Dame's own mission statement. And what we say in the petition is this: on paper, administrators of Notre Dame, you're committed to the church's teachings on marriage and sexuality. Given that fact, in light of the fact that increasingly, nationally, and even so on our own campus, there's a subtle or not so subtle, I don't know if I would want to say attack, but encroachment on these understandings, even in Indiana's own legislatures, we call upon you to take up the defense of marriage as you're committed to it. We're not asking Notre Dame to change its principles and what it believes. Notre Dame is unequivocal about what it believes on paper, and yet it has stood absolutely silent. It has been totally mute. Father Jenkins has said nothing about marriage, nothing. And he's spoken out about other political issues. He speaks out about abortion. He has said and done absolutely nothing. No institution in America is in a better position than Notre Dame to be a leader in the marriage debate. Notre Dame has absolutely squandered its opportunity. We call upon them to do something of this nature. And I've got 1 minute here, I'll be very swift. A sizable group of students quickly organize what they call a counter petition to this petition of ours. And to speak bluntly, and this is absolutely true, this counter petition is the saddest thing I've seen in 4 years at Notre Dame. It's a true travesty, and the students who signed it should think twice about what we're trying to do, about what the counter petition represents as far as advancing civil dialogue at Notre Dame, and about the sort of attitude that the counter petition evinces insofar as discussing marriage civilly in a pluralistic way with charity and compassion and understanding goes. I'm not going to have time to read these things, but I have here in front of me the Notre Dame petition and text of the counter petition, which culminates very briefly in this line. The authors of the Stop SCOP petition conclude this: SCOP's motivation can only be interpreted as discrimination against individuals based on sexual orientation. Now, not only does that have nothing to do with the petition that we wrote, but it's an absolutely irresponsible response to an attempt to create dialogue. The students who signed this petition ought to be ashamed. They're doing nothing to advance dialogue at Notre Dame. The claims that they make, the empirical claims that they make in the counter petition, are falsifiable. I have 4 or 5 articles right in front of me that demonstrate this. They neglect to mention that the leading studies that they support in defense of their no difference thesis have been proclaimed by those same sociologists and gay rights activists to be atypical and to be non-representative. So the counter petition is a house of cards, and I'm disappointed that people created it and signed it. There are more fruitful ways to engage, and it behooves all of us students to try to focus on what those better ways may be, rather than being divisive. I know that I'm out of time, but I'm happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for having me today. I'm very honored to be back here at Notre Dame. The last time I gave a presentation to a group this large, I was a sophomore, which was a while ago, and this time around I have a mom blog now, and I practice this speech in front of my 5-month-old. But you have to bear with me because he thought I was very funny. But he also doesn't really understand English yet. So anyway, a lot has been discussed today very well and very thoroughly, but my talk is just going to discuss blogging and social media. Oh, there's my 5-month-old. So when I was first asked to speak, I wondered, well, what do I have to say about blogging? What do I have to say about social media? And then I remembered what it's like every day when my husband gets home from work. And I think about what he experiences. In case you can't tell, I'm SpongeBob. And I have a lot to say about everything. So I started my blog for basically 3 reasons. One, I needed a creative outlet. Or really, I just needed an outlet of any kind, with my SpongeBob impressions every day. And grandparents always want photos and stories. And then what's most relevant to this talk, I wanted to join the conversation. As cliche as it is, and as it sounds, I wanted to share my story, no matter how ordinary it is. I'm just a mom at home with 2 sons who are constantly getting into everything, but it's a lot of fun. And I wasn't expecting to find such a sense of community when I started my blog, but that's exactly what I found. And I believe that you can too. I'm always telling so many people who ask me about my blog that they really should start their own. And as the diagram shows, I kind of think of blogs as a never-ending story. Today I could write a post that references something from last Tuesday, and I'll link to that. And then in that post from last Tuesday, I'll list something from last January, and it goes on and on. You can find so much of my story just from my blog. And it builds new forms of community. I'm able to connect with so many similar people that have the same interests and that are interested in learning about the same things that I am. But also, I'm exposed to different perspectives rather than just staying in the same bubble. That's the beauty of the internet. You can link to anything. And now just for some general stats about the blogging world. WordPress is one of the biggest blogging platforms in the blogosphere, and there are over 77 million WordPress blogs. And 409 million people read those blogs, and that's just WordPress. The other biggest one, which is Blogger, doesn't even publish their stats. Tumblr, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, is a microblogging platform, and they have 174 million blogs. So those are a lot of big numbers, but what do they mean? They mean that stories are being documented and that opinions are being shared. There's a conversation going on, and you can join it. Now, as an introverted person, naturally, I can't really help you become a stellar conversationalist at a party, but I can show you how simple it is to join the online conversation. So first, with just some general tips, you need to choose a blogging platform. You can just do a simple Google search to see what will suit you best. I chose Blogger. It just has a very simple, its interface is very user-friendly because I'm not very smart with computers, but I can manage it with Blogger. You should choose a name, and you should probably choose something that is not such a mouthful as cedars and tiny flowers. And then choose a design. This sounds superficial, but a nice looking page goes a long way. I think I saw on a BuzzFeed list last year that the page for Space Jam is still the same as it was in 1996. Or maybe it wasn't 1996. But anyway, that's really cool for the nature of Space Jam, but people won't really find you very credible if you're using something that looks like it's from 1996 in 2014. So those are all logical first steps. But here are the tips, other tips that I'd like to share now that you've secured your own corner of the World Wide Web. Write. Just write, write, and write. It's very hard to develop your own voice at first, especially when blogging is, for me, it's very, you're really putting yourself out there, so you're constantly on guard about what am I supposed to say, how can I say it, people aren't going to understand what I'm saying. That's okay, it's your blog. So just keep writing, and it's hard because in the beginning it may be like someone's not listening, no one's commenting, you're looking at your stats, you're getting one page view from some spam site. But just keep writing because your voice will get better and it will just become so much easier for you. Get to know your own identity. For me, I'm a mom blog, it's really easy. But with someone with so many gifts, you can kind of tailor. I could see you would be very good at an academic blog, probably. And then to go on, just it's very important to be personable and engaging. I love blogs that respond to me. I love blogs where I feel like I'm building a relationship with the writer. And if you think about the posts that you click on, like a social media site like Facebook, you're much more likely to click on a link if you're friends with the person that shared it, if you interact with them, if you know what they're normally thinking like. And those friendships are possible to be made in the blogging world. And then it's also important to read other blogs and to interact. Leave a comment. Comments are amazing. Start discussions. If you like someone's post, tell them. We are kind of in a world, you know, where it seems like you get a trophy for anything, which is kind of crazy, especially now as a parent. I definitely don't like that, but when you're doing something where you're sharing your story, where you're sharing your opinion, it is nice to get feedback. As Michael said, it's really important to have a dialogue going. So how can you have a dialogue going if no one's really talking back to you? And it's important to be current, but it's also prudent to think before you post anything. It's hard to balance because the internet moves so quickly, but screenshots are forever, and it's much easier to take some time to put your thoughts down reasonably rather than have to backtrack. And opinion also just evolves very quickly, so you do have to exercise caution. And then it's also very prudent to be respectful. Sarcasm is so easy to convey. Did you get that? It's not really even in person when I'm talking. So it's extra hard when you're just typing and you're like, did I put enough exclamation points there? Do they know that I'm not mad? I'm just putting my point of view out there. So just be respectful, be cautious. And there are many other conversations going on elsewhere. Twitter and Instagram are my two favorite other social media devices. And there are large groups of people active with those two. Each of them have 200 million active users, not just accounts. That's just such a large number of people that you could reach. And these are great to continue your dialogue if you're a blogger, but they're also wonderful for conveying your point of view if you're not comfortable with starting a blog or if you don't have the time to start a blog. They're nice and quick and they pack a lot of power. I really love Instagram. I won't wax poetic about an app, but I really enjoy that. So those were all, kind of positives about social media. But there are a lot of challenges as well. Like I said, conveying tone. That is definitely hard when, rather than here, I'm at a presentation. You can hear my voice, you can see my expressions. And then it's also hard to ignore the noise. There are a lot of irrational pieces out there. Things go viral, and it might just be because a puppy looks cute, which are great. I like the cute puppy things. But there are just a lot of irrational things that it's hard to sift through what is valuable to you. And then it's also very hard to stay empathetic. Blogging and just with social media as a whole, you see it on a screen, whether it be your phone screen, your computer screen. And it's very hard to remember that there's a writer behind that screen, and it's hard for the writer to remember there's a reader behind that screen, or a viewer, or a double tapper, or whatever, for Instagram. So it's definitely hard, and to battle that dangerous rut of separating the person from the online profile, I like to think of a favorite quote of mine from the renowned philosopher Dietrich von Hildebrand. And he's probably thinking in his grave, what do I have to do with social media? But this quote illustrates that marriage is not side by side, it's face to face. And you have to bear with me because I'm a hopeless romantic who, when watching The Matrix last weekend, I was shouting that Neo was resurrected by love's first kiss. And my husband was, more impressed with reliving his, that's from The Matrix. He was more impressed with living with his, favorite teenage movie and the stopping bullets in the dystopian world, and I was just saying, well, it's like Sleeping Beauty. But anyway, so here's the quote. But two human beings can also turn to face one another, and in touching one another in an interpenetrating glance, give birth to a mysterious fusion of their souls. They become conscious of one another, and making the other the object of his contemplation and responses, can spiritually immerse himself in the other. This is the I-thou relationship in which the partners are not side by side, but they are face to face. That's a beautiful passage. But again, you're probably thinking I'm crazy for believing that this is relevant to social media. It's a very romantic and a very intimate and spiritual quote. And how does this even relate to my audience when most of you are students, and I know from experience that engaged students are very rare, let alone married. And that's all very true. How can it be related to blogging and to social media, which all take place via a cold screen? Well, I think it shares some great insight on how we can empathize with and relate to people when we're communicating online. And when we form relationships with people, whether they come from the same viewpoint or not. We have to remember that we have to face the person as an individual and remember that there's a person behind the perspective. This easily goes along with what Pope Francis calls on people to do, to consider the person. And obviously we can't always be FaceTiming or having a Google Hangout or Skyping, and those are all methods where you can see the face of the person you're interacting with. But that's not always possible, and honestly it would be very awkward to be doing that all the time. But if we strive to act as though we are face to face, if we consider the person, if we imagine we are conversing face to face with someone behind that inanimate screen, it is easier to converse, and thus it's easier to listen. So, I hope that you all start blogs, and you let me know which blog you started, and I'll become a reader.
Thank you, Katrina, and thank you to all our other panelists. At this point, we'd like to invite questions from the audience. If you do have a question for one or all of our panelists, please proceed to the microphones in the middle of the room. Thank you.
Your email address has been associated with all these events. I was wondering if any of the correspondences you receive are of a notably higher quality than the anti-Scott petition that you spoke about.
So Tim's referencing the fact that on the Notre Dame media releases for this event and for the March 17th marriage panel, I've been listed as the contact person. I have received emails, mostly from alums, some of whom say you're fighting a good fight, keep it up. Others of whom are rather unkind. But most of the latter camp have argued in this way, whatever happened to academic freedom at Notre Dame? And I say I'm confused. And they say, well, you're hosting a panel on the church and marriage, and all the panelists agree with the church's teaching on marriage. And this was a problem for this person. So no, the quality is not noticeably higher, unfortunately.
So is there any particular hope for, are there people on the other side who seem to be particularly prepared to engage in dialogue here?
Not that I've seen at Notre Dame. Yeah, not that I've seen at Notre Dame. But as Sharif points out in the article, the other side hasn't heard responsible argumentation for the most part. And so in some ways we ought to blame ourselves for the fact that they're ill-prepared to understand what we're saying in some ways. And as other speakers and writers have said, we're in the situation we are right now with respect to same-sex marriage as part of a much more long-standing narrative in which all of us have failed to witness to marriage properly.
I would like to ask about the difference between using the word traditional and conjugal. Could you just speak to that?
Who's that addressed to? It's a great question. I agree with Irina that we ought to avoid the word traditional for a variety of reasons. In place of, we should use instead the conjugal vision of marriage, which is actually more faithful to the early church's language concerning marriage, the conjugal good. But more importantly, as Irina pointed out, people associate the knee-jerk reaction to tradition is that tradition is more often than not something that you want to get away from. A lot of things that were traditional, as you said, are bad. So I propose that we speak of conjugal marriage. I also propose that henceforth nobody ever speak of gay marriage. I don't know what that could possibly be. Marriages can't be gay. And we can speak of same-sex marriage, and that's what we're talking about. a marriage between persons of the same sex. But nobody in this room has an objection to two gay persons marrying each other as long as they're members of the opposite sex. This is a serious distinction. We're fine if gay people marry one another, as long as one is a man and one is a woman. That's fine. But if two heterosexual persons of the same sex want to get married, that's not okay. And this is the point. We're obscuring, we need to recover a much more clear lexicon with respect to marriage.
And also just the word conjugal, maybe some of you know more about the etymology, but conjugo, with basically join, conjoin together. And so there's beauty and even in the word itself.
Hi, I'm a freshman, and
What is your name, freshman?
Brendan, Michael. I was just confused about the audience because between, I know it's like kind of a topic, like a social topic in politics, like secular politics. But between Mike calling, like the petition calling the Notre Dame faculty, like in particular, to be more vocal about what they've already signed, like agreed to as their opinions. Sorry if that's unfair. Like, are you talking to, trying to convince the Catholics who are in favor of homosexual marriage? Or are you talking to anyone who's a contributor, even in the secular argument, like in politics? Are you imploring Catholics who?
Everybody. So basically, even at Family Research Council, for a while we were using the word traditional marriage. We're trying to find the right language for how to talk about the issue. And right now we're looking at using natural marriage when we're talking about natural marriage, conjugal marriage. So it's more of, if anyone, whoever's trying to impact in the public square, we should have our language right. We should have it down, because I think, like I said in my talk, that language is very important, and how we say and what we say means a lot. So I think that now, and not only at Family Research Council, but other public policy groups in DC are walking away from traditional marriage. Why do we use that for 10 years? Now they're wondering who ran away with that, and now we're all using it. And now we're kind of stepping back and saying, this is not the right way to even approach this. So let's go back to basics, and let's frame it. And this is what I was trying to get at. Like, we need to reframe the entire debate and put it on our terms, not on their terms.
My question is for Mrs. Harrington. I was wondering whether you see in this type of activity a business side for a woman who wants to stay at home and perhaps has for example, a future sister-in-law who says that she doesn't want to work.
Yes, there is. I just started my blog in 2012, so I'm definitely not a big enough blog to be eliciting enough ads to support my family, but there are many blogs that aren't even just focused on the family, that are just, maybe design blogs, or even popular blogs like Simca Fisher. She's a big Catholic blogger. They're all stay-at-home moms, and they write on the side, and they're there with their children. Like, I'm very fortunate to be able to be at home with my children. But yes, it's very possible. In many ways, you can have ads on your sidebar, or you can do sponsored ads. You can, if someone is attracted to your writing, they might ask you to write on their other blog. So there are many opportunities.
And I'll just add that Simca, I think, has 9 children, and she also writes for the National Catholic Register. And I have no idea how this woman does it, but she's amazing, and she's really funny. If you've never read her blog, she takes a really fun comic take on the Catholic issues.
Yes.
question was about adoption. Because I know you mentioned, even if we accept that marriage is just between a man and a woman, should people need to be married in order to adopt? Isn't it better for a child to be in some kind of home with people who love them than to just be in a foster care system or somewhere that's not permanent?
This question's for you. I think Professor Bradley answered it really well in the last session, but
That's my dad, FYI.
I
Don't want
wanted
any confusions here.
No, sorry, whoever you want to answer can answer it. You had mentioned that, it's really important to have involvement in that.
well, I know of particular circumstances where a working mom she decided to adopt a few children, and she's a single mom, and she's never at home, and so she's not even raising her children. It's a nanny who's raising the children. But I think that it is important to have this example of the mother and the father and the feminine and masculine, because that is how a child learns his or her own identity, by relating to the other, and also so learning from the mother how to be a woman, and learning from the father how she should be treated. And so if she doesn't have that, or at least if there was someone in that child's life who is a father figure or the mother figure, that's important. And so, I mean, the ideal would still be to be in a two-parent household with the mother and the father.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm a senior here at Notre Dame. And Michael, you talked a lot about talking with other students in a way that is persuasive and compassionate. And I think a lot of times at Notre Dame, as an 18 to 22-year-old, you're not in a position where you're thinking about marriage and children. You're more thinking about finding relationships. And so my question would be how to kind of answer students, gay students who say, well, it's unfair or unkind of you to basically condemn me to a single life and a lonely life, and you yourself would be looking for a husband and someone to share the rest of your life with. What about me?
That's a great question, Elizabeth. Thank you. Chapter 6 of What is Marriage addresses this question specifically. More importantly, I think that question bespeaks a larger problem in our culture. That problem is this. Our society has an impression, for the most part, that marriage is simply the most fulfilling relationship on a spectrum of relationships at which it's the top. So the idea here is that non-marital relationships are intrinsically less fulfilling or carry less dignity or are less valuable for the individual than is a marital relationship. And of course, that's a problem. It's that understanding of marriage that's led everyone to think that marriage ought to, not just that marriage is a right, but that you have a right to marry whomever you want. So the question is flawed in this sense. I don't see Catholic priests asking that question. And I don't see men who are contemplating discerning the priesthood asking that question. And I know people who are not same-sex attracted, who are single, who don't ask that question, and yet they don't anticipate marriage in their own futures. And so I think in response to that question, one has to try to recalibrate one's interlocutor's perspective, broadly speaking, of the meaning of celibacy and sexuality, whether one can live a fulfilled life without living sexually, or I suppose I should say without having sex. Because that's a vision that we've lost, in large part because we've lost that vision. The idea that somebody could be called to a life without marriage, which is an idea that Christ put forward very explicitly, is sort of unintelligible and seems actually unjust.
I think that's the last question we have time for today. Please join me in thanking all of our panelists.